In 1913, a routine police photograph from a sealed crime scene contained an impossible and terrifying detail hidden in plain sight. A reflection in a piece of glass that would challenge everything investigators thought they knew about the case and ultimately destroy the life of the detective who dared to look too closely. The discovery happened over a century later in the sterile, fluorescent-lit basement of the New York State Archives. Dr. Aris Thorne, a meticulous digital archivist with wire-rimmed glasses and an eye for detail, was working through his daily assignment of digitizing recently unearthed police evidence photos. These weren't glamorous cases, mostly forgotten files from the early 1900s that had been stored in a warehouse and rediscovered during renovation. Aris had already processed dozens of grainy black and white images that morning. Burglaries, street fights, minor accidents, the usual criminal fare from a bygone era. Then he came across a photograph that made him pause and lean closer to his screen. It showed the study of Julian Croft, a wealthy industrialist who'd been found dead in his locked office on a cold February morning in 1913. The room was pristine, except for Croft's body, slumped over his mahogany desk, a revolver lying near his outstretched hand. According to the case notes, police had ruled it a clear suicide within hours. The photograph seemed unremarkable at first glance. Croft's study was exactly what you'd expect from a man of his wealth. Leather-bound books lined the walls, expensive furniture filled the space, and an ornate glass-fronted bookcase displayed his collection of rare volumes. The lighting was dim, typical of early photography, but something about the image nagged at Aris as he prepared to move on. There was a faint anomaly in the reflection of that glass bookcase, barely visible, but definitely present. The reflection seemed to show more than it should, containing details that didn't quite match the direct view. He decided to zoom in and enhance the image using the archive's sophisticated digital restoration software, having no idea that what he was about to discover would unravel an official story and reveal a truth that had been deliberately buried for over a century. Using the archive's high-resolution scanner and digital enhancement software, Aris began to magnify the reflection in the glass. The process was slow and methodical, requiring careful adjustment of contrast and brightness to bring out details that had been hidden for more than 100 years. What gradually emerged on his screen made his coffee grow cold as he stared in growing disbelief. The reflection showed the room from the camera's perspective, exactly as expected. There was the police photographer, recognizable by his bulky camera equipment and the black cloth draped over his head. There were the two officers who had responded to the scene, their uniforms crisp and formal. Their faces were serious and professional as they surveyed the grim scene. And there was the body of Julian Croft, slumped motionless over his desk. But the reflection also revealed something else, something that shouldn't have been there and wasn't mentioned in any official documentation. Standing directly behind the photographer was another figure, a tall, gaunt man with hollow cheeks and unusually pale skin that seemed almost luminous in the dim light. His clothes were dark and formal, but seemed to hang loosely on his thin frame. His hair was dark and slicked back, and his eyes appeared unusually bright, even in the grainy reflection. What disturbed Aris most was the figure's expression. While everyone else in the reflection appeared focused on the grim task at hand, this mysterious man wore a look of a calm satisfaction. His face held an expression of detached interest, as if he were observing the aftermath of the tragedy with casual attention. Aris rubbed his eyes and looked again, adjusting the brightness and contrast to make sure he wasn't seeing some digital artifact. The figure was definitely there, clear as day, once properly enhanced. His presence was undeniable, yet according to the official report, only 3 people had been present during documentation: the photographer and 2 responding officers. No mention was made of any additional personnel or witnesses. The discrepancy was troubling enough to warrant further investigation. Assuming he was looking at some photographic artifact, perhaps a double exposure or processing error, Aris pulled up the official case file for Julian Croft's death. What he found was puzzling in its brevity. The case had been handled by Detective Miles Corbin, a 20-year veteran with an impeccable reputation for thoroughness. Corbin was known throughout the department for his meticulous casework and ability to uncover evidence that other investigators missed. He had solved several high-profile cases and was being considered for promotion. Yet this same Detective Corbin had closed this high-profile case in under 48 hours, despite several factors that should have warranted thorough investigation. Julian Croft was a prominent businessman whose death would naturally attract public attention. His family insisted he showed no signs of depression or suicidal thoughts. The wealthy industrialist had been making plans for business expansion and had recently announced his engagement to Margaret Ashworth, a prominent socialite. The report itself was uncharacteristically sparse for someone of Corbin's reputation. It simply stated that Croft had been found in his locked study with a revolver and single gunshot wound to the head. The door had been locked from inside, and the key was found in Croft's pocket. The window was also locked from within, with no other means of entry or exit. Based on these facts, Detective Corbin concluded that Julian Croft had taken his own life. Case closed. But Aris's curiosity was now fully engaged, and the mysterious figure in the reflection continued to haunt his thoughts. He searched through the archives database and found that a second photograph had been taken at the crime scene, a wider shot from a slightly different angle. He digitized this second image and applied the same enhancement techniques. What he saw made his hands shake slightly as he adjusted the screen and double-checked his work. The mysterious figure was present in this photograph too, clearly visible in the reflection of the same glass-fronted bookcase. But something had changed between the 2 shots. The figure had moved. In the second image, taken perhaps minutes after the first, the gaunt man was standing in a different position entirely. He was now much closer to Detective Corbin's reflection, close enough that if the reflection represented reality, the 2 men would have been standing almost shoulder to shoulder. The figure's head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if studying the detective with keen interest. His expression remained that same look of calm satisfaction, but now there was something else. A sense of anticipation. The figure's changed position completely ruled out any possibility of a simple photographic error. These were official police photographs, taken minutes apart at a crime scene in 1913 by a professional photographer using standard procedures. Yet they showed an additional person who wasn't mentioned in any report and who seemed to exist only in the reflections captured in the glass. Aris sat back, trying to process what he was seeing. The implications were staggering and it made no logical sense. How could someone appear in a reflection but not in the actual scene? How could that same someone move between photographs while remaining invisible to everyone present? His mind racing, Aris decided to research what had happened to Detective Corbin after the Croft case. What he discovered added another layer of mystery to an already bizarre situation. Detective Miles Corbin had resigned from the police force just 2 weeks after closing the Croft investigation, citing vague personal health reasons in his brief resignation letter. For a man who had been decorated multiple times and was being considered for promotion, this sudden departure had surprised his colleagues and superiors. More disturbing was what happened next. Detective Miles Corbin had completely vanished from public life after leaving the force. There were no records of him taking into the job, no forwarding address, no property purchases in his name, no trace of where he might have gone. It was as if the decorated detective had simply decided to disappear from the face of the earth, abandoning not just his career, but his entire previous existence. Aris realized he wasn't just looking at a mysterious photograph anymore. He was looking at evidence of something that had been deliberately covered up. Something powerful enough to drive a respected detective into hiding. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Aris spent the rest of that day searching through the archive's records for any trace of Detective Corbin's personal effects. Late in the afternoon, he struck gold. A mislabeled box in the basement storage area contained items donated to the archive decades earlier. Items that had belonged to Miles Corbin and had been sitting forgotten for over 50 years. Inside the dusty cardboard box, beneath old uniforms and commendation certificates, Aris found a leather-bound journal. The cover was worn and cracked with age, and the pages had yellowed, but the writing inside was still clearly legible. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it and began reading entries from February 1913, the same month as the Croft investigation. The early entries were routine, documenting Corbin's daily cases with methodical precision. But the entries following the Croft investigation told a very different story. The handwriting became increasingly erratic, and the content grew more disturbing with each page. Corbin's journal revealed that he had been the only person at the crime scene who had noticed the figure in the glass reflection. While the other officers and photographer had focused on documenting what appeared to be a straightforward suicide, Corbin had been drawn to something in the bookcase's reflection that the others seemed unable to see.
According to his private notes, Corbin had initially dismissed what he saw as a trick of light or shadow. But as he continued investigating over the following days, he became convinced that what he had witnessed was far more sinister than any natural phenomenon. The detective wrote about his growing belief that Julian Croft's death hadn't been suicide at all, but something much worse. A murder committed by an entity that existed beyond normal human understanding. He described returning to the crime scene multiple times, studying the bookcase and its reflections from different angles. The journal entries became increasingly paranoid as days passed. Corbin described seeing the same gaunt figure in shop windows and mirrors around the city, always watching him, always getting closer each time he caught a glimpse of it. He wrote about feeling constantly observed, about an oppressive sense of dread that followed him home each night. But it was Corbin's research into the bookcase itself that provided the most chilling details. The detective had discovered that Julian Croft had purchased the antique glass-fronted bookcase just 1 week before his death, acquiring it from the estate sale of Harrison Blackwood, another wealthy businessman who had also died under mysterious circumstances 3 months earlier. Blackwood's death had also been ruled suicide, and like Croft, he had been found alone in a locked room with no signs of forced entry. Corbin's investigation revealed that Blackwood had purchased the bookcase from yet another estate sale, continuing a trail of ownership that seemed to coincide with unexplained
deaths among the city's wealthy elite. In his journal, Corbin theorized that the entity wasn't a ghost of any victim, but something far more dangerous, the killer itself. Something that could exist only in reflections and use mirrors and glass as windows into our world. He believed the bookcase served as some kind of portal, allowing this supernatural predator to observe potential victims and eventually claim them. Most terrifying of all, Corbin became convinced that by observing the entity in the photographs, by studying its reflection and acknowledging its presence, he had somehow attracted its attention and become its next target. The more he investigated, the more frequently he saw it, and the closer it seemed to get to breaking through from the world of reflections into physical reality. The final entry in Detective Corbin's journal was dated exactly 2 weeks after the Croft investigation. The handwriting was barely legible. The words scrawled across the page with obvious haste and terror. "It's no longer just in the glass," Corbin had written. "I see it in the corner of my eye now, standing in shadows, getting bolder each day. It knows I saw it that morning in Croft's study. It knows I understand what really happened. I have to get away before it steps all the way out of the reflections and into the real world. If anyone finds this journal, burn those photographs. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Aris closed the journal with shaking hands, finally understanding why Detective Corbin had fled his career and disappeared without a trace. The decorated officer hadn't quit. Due to health problems, he had run for his life from something supernatural that had marked him as its next victim. With this new knowledge, Aris returned to his computer and pulled up the original evidence manifest for the Croft case. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions about a deliberate cover-up. According to official records, the glass plate negatives for the photographs of Croft's study had been destroyed in a precinct fire in early 1914, less than a year after the investigation. But when Aris cross-referenced this information with historical fire department records, he found something deeply troubling. There was no record of any fire at that police precinct in 1914 or in any surrounding years. The supposed fire that had destroyed the photographic evidence had never actually happened. Someone with significant authority had systematically erased the evidence, removing any trace of what had really occurred in Julian Croft's study that February morning in 1913. The official story of suicide had been carefully maintained, while the truth had been buried along with any proof of the supernatural entity that had claimed multiple victims. As Aris sat in the quiet archive basement, surrounded by boxes of forgotten history, he realized that some historical records are buried for good reason. The reflection in that antique bookcase had captured something that was never meant to be seen, something that existed in the spaces between reality and reflection. The mystery of the 1913 photograph had been solved, but the solution was far more terrifying than any conventional crime. Detective Miles Corbin had stumbled upon evidence of something that challenged everything people believed about reality, and his attempts to investigate had nearly cost him his life. Only by abandoning everything he knew and fleeing into obscurity had he managed to escape the entity that hunted through mirrors and reflections. Sometimes the secrets staring back at us from the past are best left undisturbed, hidden away in dusty archives where they can't reach out and claim new victims. The reflection in the glass had revealed a truth that society wasn't ready to accept. If you found this historical mystery as fascinating and disturbing as we did, please like this video and subscribe for more strange stories from the archives, and let us know in the comments. What do you think really happened to Detective Miles Corbin after he disappeared? Did he manage to escape the entity in the glass? Or did it eventually catch up with him? Your theories might help solve the final piece of this century-old puzzle.